Hello all, my name's Tyven and welcome to my first devlog for my hobby project, Legacy, an open world sandbox RPG where each new character is the child of your previous one. For this video, I'm going to focus on the character sprites, where I started, where it is now, and what I plan on doing with it next. When I decided to make Legacy, I knew I wanted a pixel art style. I wanted to be able to make as much of the project myself as I could, and there were going to be a lot of assets. However, to motivate myself in the early project and to help settle on a style, I decided to hire someone to create the initial player sprites. So I reached out to Czech Gentleman on Fiverr, link in the description, and commissioned both a male and female based sprite sheet. These were pretty substantial requests as I already had a lot of animations in mind. I requested a walk, run and idle animation for basic movement, a one-handed and two-handed weapon swing, firing a bow, and just to tie it off, 3 magic casting animations of different lengths, for all 4 cardinal directions and both genders. As you can probably tell from my avatar, I was pretty taken by these sprites, and whilst the animations have had a bit of an overhaul as the game has developed, the design of the character hasn't changed. Whilst I was happy with the sprites, they were not organised in a way that would be easy to use, so I reorganised them and made a separate male and female sprite sheet with all their animations. I then edited out all the weapons and magic effects as I planned to add them back in as separate sprites, so that I could reuse the animations for different actions and equipment. As I continued working on the game, it became apparent that these sprite sheets did not contain all the animations I required in the long run, so some adjustments were needed. The first of which was adding customizability and variation. Skin colour, eye colour and hair colour were key places to start. To ensure these traits had lots of options, I decided, instead of drawing separate sprites for these, I would adjust these colours within the Godot engine by modulating the sprites. However, when deciding how to implement variation, I had to consider the genetic passing of traits. I didn't want just one parent's traits to be passed on to the child, effectively locking the colours to colours that have already occurred in the world. Instead, I wanted it to be a mix of the traits of the 2 parents, with a chance of mutation, by slightly adjusting the resulting colour randomly. This raised the problem of unnatural colours. A player with a lot of patience could produce any colour by means of mutation, if the mutations randomly affected the colour values directly. I made the decision that the potential to get unnatural hair and eye colours was not a problem, as it would help make characters and NPCs more identifiable, and the game's style was already colourful and highly saturated. However, I wanted to restrict the skin tones, as I wanted the less natural skin tones to be an indicator of heritage from fantasy species in the future. As such, I settled on a very rudimentary 2-dimensional skin cloud. With the base sprite being pale with a yellower skin tint, I opted for axes of a redder tint and a darker tint. Picking the extremities of each axis, I've separated them into 10 steps, allowing for 121 different skin tones as each axis goes from 0 to 10. This would allow the skin tone mutations to step along these axes, not restricting the skin tone to the colour of the parents, but still restricting it to the deemed human skin tone, as well as having the option to add additional axes for other fantasy races. The next change was prompted when making the first items of clothing. One of the main differences between the original male and female sprites was that the female torso was narrower than the male's. Whilst it was not a problem in and of itself, it did mean that every item of clothing would have to be drawn twice to match the different sizes, and any equipment animations would have to be realigned due to the different hand positions. To correct this, I redrew the female sprite sheet to match the male sprite sheet's silhouette, making the difference between the male and female sprites solely rely on the eyelashes and underwear. Whilst this decreases the visual difference between the two, it halves the workload on drawing clothes and armour and the number of animations, so I felt it was a reasonable trade-off. The last change I've made is currently the largest, a complete overhaul of the combat animations. After getting a feel for how the character felt moving around and doing actions, I felt that combat, particularly with the melee weapon, was a bit lackluster. In old Legend of Zelda fashion, pressing the attack button caused the character to swing the same way every time. This restricted the weapons to only weapons that could be swung horizontally. With other aspects of combat planned to have much more variation, I decided that different attack animations and combos were necessary to keep the melee combat engaging. I redrew the combat animations and add in a second horizontal swing, a stab attack and an overhead swing animation, making sure that each animation had a left-handed and right-handed version. I also added a dash animation, just in case I decided it was needed. This brings us to where I am currently with the character sprites. Future goals are to add the rest of the combat animations, as currently I've only gone as far as setting up the one-handed weapons in game. Adding these animations will likely involve drawing more attack variations and combos. The sprite sheet also doesn't have a blocking animation or a death animation, both of which I need to implement. In the next devlog, I'm going to go through something a little less asset focused and talk about how the world's biome generation works using open simplex noise, what limitations this method has and how I've tried to overcome them. I hope to see you in the next video, and thank you for watching.